Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems shaping our world one book at a time.
Today's going to be a bit different. Usually we look at how systems, manipulate us, how algorithms shape our attention, or how economics shapes our behavior.
Right.
But today, we are flipping the script. We're looking at the mechanics of how ordinary people can intervene in those systems.
Exactly. We're asking the question that, usually comes up at the pub after a few drinks when everyone's complaining about the state of the world. Okay, everything is broken, but what can I actually do about it?
Yeah, the big question.
And our guide for this deep dive is a book called The Activists Handbook by Aidan Ricketts.
It's a crucial text because it moves the conversation away from, let's say, hope and outrage and moves it toward engineering.
Ricketts asks, how can an ordinary citizen effectively intervene in entrenched power structures?
And I want to pause on that word intervene, because when I hear activism, my brain, it immediately goes to a protest march. I think of signs, chanting, maybe some glue in a road. Is that what we're talking about? Well, that's part of it, but Ricketts would argue that is the surface level, a very visible but maybe not the most important part.
Okay.
If you only focus on the protest aspect, shouting at a building, you are missing the actual machinery of change. Ricketts defines activism much more broadly. He's talking about organized, lawful, and sustained collective action as a mechanism of governance.
Governance, that's a heavy word. That's a serious word for a bunch of people just trying to save a forest.
But it's accurate. I mean, think about it. Ricketts argues that in a healthy democracy, this kind of friction, citizens pushing back against power, isn't a bug, it's a feature. It is a functional part of how the system processes decisions and stays healthy.
The problem, and the reason we chose this book for the channel, is that most of us don't see it that way. We feel like our political participation has been whittled down to two very ineffective options.
Yes.
Option A, you vote once every 3 or 4 years. Option B, you get mad on the internet.
Exactly. We have the ceremonial ballot box and we have clicktivism. And the uncomfortable reality Ricketts exposes is that real decision-making power, whether that's in the halls of parliament or in corporate boardrooms, is structurally insulated from both of those things.
Meaning, the system doesn't really care if I vote for the other guy in 4 years, and it definitely doesn't care if I share an angry meme.
Precisely. The system is designed to weather those storms. Ricketts argues that democracy is actually a 247 process, is a constant struggle of competing interests.
Right.
If you only show up on election day, you are absent for the 1,400 days in between when the actual decisions are being made.
So the mission for this deep dive is to look under the hood of that 247 process. We are setting aside ideology today. We don't care if you want to save the whales or lower taxes. The mechanics we're discussing apply to anyone trying to force a system to move when it prefers to stay still.
It's about physics, not politics. It's about levers. How do you apply enough leverage to move an immovable object?
Okay, so let's start with the guy who wrote the manual, Aidan Ricketts. He has a very specific resume that makes him, well, perfect for this.
He really does. He sits right on the fault line of this discussion. On one side, he is a legal scholar. He's an academic at Southern Cross University in Australia. He speaks the language of the courts. He understands administrative law. He knows how the bureaucracy thinks.
He's a suit. He can wear the suit.
He can wear the suit.
Huh.
But he is also a veteran of the Northeast Forest Alliance campaigns. So he has been on the front lines of blockades. He has been the guy locking himself to heavy machinery.
So he's the guy who can write the legal brief in the morning and get arrested in the afternoon.
And that dual background is essential. He understands the rules of the game, which is the law, and he understands how to disrupt those rules, which is activism.
Right.
He argues that if you only know how to protest, you'll get crushed by the legal system. But if you only know the law, you'll never generate enough pressure to force a change. You need to be bilingual. You have to speak both languages.
It's interesting that this book didn't start as some academic text, right? It actually started as training manuals.
No, not at all. It was written for people in muddy camps trying to stop logging trucks. It evolved from practical, on-the-ground tactics into a university curriculum.
So it's been field tested.
Very much so. And that context matters because Ricketts begins by laying out the institutional context we live in. And he makes a distinction here that I think is really difficult for most of us to wrap our heads around. He separates liberalism from democracy.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because in the West, we weld those words together. We say we live in a liberal democracy. I always assumed that was just one big happy concept.
We all do. And that assumption is the first crisis in perception we need to fix. Ricketts argues that these two concepts are actually in a constant state of tension. a tug of war. They have different goals.
How
Well,
so?
think about the roots. Liberalism, in the classical 17th century sense, think John Locke, is essentially about the individual. It is about building a fortress around your private life and, most importantly, your private property.
Okay.
The goal of liberalism is to say, the king can't come in here. The mob can't take this from me.
So liberalism is the keep out sign on my front lawn. It protects me and my stuff from the state?
Exactly. It is a defensive architecture against power. But democracy is the opposite. Democracy is the collective will. It is the people deciding what is best for the community. And here's where the friction starts. What happens when the democratic will of the community wants to stop a development that is protected by the liberal rights of the property owner?
I see. So the community says, we voted and we want this forest to stay a forest. And the developer says, too bad, I own the deed. And liberalism says, I can do what I want with my property.
And the legal system, the institutions we rely on, is not a neutral referee in that fight. Ricketts argues it is heavily biased toward liberalism. It is designed to protect the owner from the democracy.
From the will of the people.
From the will of the people. The system creates a procedural maze that makes it very hard for a collective group of citizens to challenge an individual property owner.
So when we get frustrated that the government seems to ignore a massive protest in order to protect, say, a mining company, we shouldn't be baffled.
No. Ricketts would say the system isn't broken. It's working exactly as designed. It is prioritizing the private right over the collective wish. That's its default setting.
Wow. That leads us right to his central thesis, then. If the system is designed to ignore you, then effective activism isn't about just being loud or caring enough.
Right. It's not about spontaneous passion. He says it is a learned system. It requires mapping power, understanding legal constraints, and organizing participation strategically. It's a skill set.
Okay.
There's a great anecdote in the book called The Sea Change Story that illustrates this perfectly.
This is about the coastal property owners,
Yeah.
right? The rich ones.
Yes. Ricketts was consulting for a group of wealthy people who owned these beautiful beachfront homes. These were not radicals. These were conservatives, well-off, probably voted for the pro-business party their whole lives.
Right.
But they were facing sea level rise and coastal erosion that threatened their houses.
So literally protecting their backyard, the
Yeah.
ultimate NMBYs.
The ultimate NMBY is not in my backyard. They started from a place of pure self-interest. They expected the government to just fix it because, they're important people, taxpayers. But the government wasn't listening. The bureaucracy was ignoring them. And Ricketts describes this transformation. As these wealthy property owners hit the friction of the system, the bureaucracy, the indifference, the legal hurdles, they changed.
They got radicalized by the process itself.
They became active citizens. They realized that simply owning property and paying taxes didn't give them a say in governance. Ricketts' thesis is that the friction of the system itself educates the participant.
That's fascinating.
You go in thinking you're a subject who just needs to ask the government for help, and you come out realizing you have to be a citizen who forces the government to act.
That is a powerful transition. Let's dive into the core systems analysis because I really want to understand why the door is locked in the first place. This first insight is about the legal system, and specifically this conflict between public interest and vested interest.
This is absolutely fundamental. We need to talk about a legal concept called standing.
Standing. Okay, this sounds like lawyer speak. Break it down for me. What does that mean in plain English?
In plain English, standing is your ticket to the show. It is the judge at the courtroom door asking, do you have a right to be here? You can't just walk into a court and sue someone because you don't like what they're doing. You have to prove you have a legitimate personal stake in the issue.
Okay, that makes sense. I can't sue my neighbor for painting their house a color I don't like.
Exactly. But in common law, that ticket is very expensive and very specific. Ricketts points to a landmark Case Australian Conservation Foundation v. the Commonwealth. This is a story that really exposes the glitch in the system.
Set the scene for us.
So, back in the day, a Japanese company proposed a massive resort development in Yeppoon, Queensland. It was going to be an environmental disaster, wetlands destroyed, massive infrastructure, you know the deal. The Australian Conservation Foundation, the ACF, sued to stop it. They argued that the approval process had violated federal law.
Seems straightforward. They are a conservation group. They are suing to conserve. That's literally their job.
You would think. But the High Court threw them out. And they didn't throw them out because the resort was legal or because the ACF was wrong on the facts. They threw them out because they said the ACF had no standing.
Wait, how does the National Conservation Foundation not have standing in a major environmental case? That makes no sense.
The court effectively said, this resort doesn't take your money. It doesn't take your land. You are just a group of people who care. And caring is not a legal interest. The court defined what they call a special interest as being primarily financial or proprietary.
So because the ACF wasn't going to lose profit from this, they were invisible to the law.
That's it. That is wild, isn't it? So unless I am personally losing a dollar, the court basically says, I don't exist in this dispute.
In the eyes of the special interest test, often yes. This is the structural tilt. The law is built to recognize and protect vested interest, property, money, things you own, but it has this massive blind spot for public interest.
So if everyone is hurt a little bit, like by polluted air or destroyed ecosystem, the court often acts like no one is hurt enough to have a case.
It perceives public advocacy as an intrusion, like, excuse me, this is a private dispute between a property owner and the government. Who are you to interrupt?
Exactly. And this is why activists so often lose in court. Not because they are wrong on the merits, but because the system literally cannot see the public interest they're trying to defend.
Okay, so you're up against a legal system that's already tilted, that prefers property to people. That brings us to the psychological system. Yeah. Ricketts references Bill Moyer's MAP model, the Movement Action Plan, and this just blew my mind, the idea of the perception of failure.
Oh, this is crucial. This is crucial for anyone who has ever tried to change anything and just felt like giving up. Moyer's model maps out the 8 stages of how movements grow. And there is this incredible paradox where activists often feel like they are failing exactly when they are succeeding.
How does that work? If I feel like I'm losing, I'm actually winning. That sounds optimistic.
Think about it from the system's point of view. When a movement starts, stage 1 or 2, nobody cares. The power holders ignore you. You are screaming into the void. It's frustrating, but it's quiet.
Right.
But if you start to gain traction, you get to stage 4, what Moyer calls takeoff. The power holders get scared. They suddenly realize their status quo is threatened. So what do?
They fight back.
They fight back, and they fight back hard. They launch smear campaigns in the media. They get their political allies to pass restrictive laws. The police might get more aggressive. Now, to the activist on the ground, this feels like utter defeat. It feels like the whole world is turning against them. Moyer calls this stage 5, perception of failure.
Because it got hard. Because there's suddenly friction.
Because the resistance spiked. But structurally, that resistance is proof that you have become a threat. You have forced the system to react. Their pushback is a direct measure of your success.
So burnout isn't just you being tired or losing hope. Burnout is a systemic feature. The system is counting on you to interpret that pushback as defeat and just go home.
Precisely. If you understand the map, you realize the pushback is actually a mile marker of success. It changes your perception entirely. You stop taking it personally and you start seeing it strategically. Oh, they're smearing us in the paper. We must be hurting their bottom line.
That is a huge shift in perspective. Okay, let's move from the courts and the psyche to the other big player on the board, corporations. Ricketts describes corporations as private bureaucracies.
This is a really helpful reframe. We're used to thinking of the government as a bureaucracy, slow, complex, full of rules. But Ricketts argues corporations are also systems of governance. They determine what we eat, how we communicate, the state of our environment.
Right. They govern huge parts of our lives.
But there is a key difference between a public bureaucracy and a private one.
Accountability.
Exactly. With a public bureaucracy, you have an ombudsman. You have freedom of information requests. Mm-hmm. You can, in theory, vote the bums out eventually. A private bureaucracy, a corporation, has none of that. It is designed to be insulated. It is, in essence, a totalitarian structure regarding its own operations.
So how do you intervene in a system that doesn't even have a suggestion box, let alone a ballot box?
Ricketts talks about a strategy he calls death by 1,000 cuts, referencing the work of Gerald Manheim. Since the corporation itself is insulated, you have to target the relationships the corporation relies on.
Ah, okay.
A corporation isn't an island. It needs insurers, it needs investors, it needs a good brand reputation, what they call a social license to operate.
So you don't attack the castle directly, you cut off the water supply and the road in.
You make the corporation toxic to its partners. You pressure the bank that lends them money. You organize the shareholders to ask embarrassing questions at the AGM. You create reputational damage that becomes a market condition. The board of directors has a legal duty to maximize profit.
Right.
If your activism makes their unethical behavior profitable, they will keep doing it. If your activism makes that behavior expensive or risky, they have to stop. Not because of morals, but because of the market.
It's using the system's own logic, the profit motive against itself. Now, let's talk about when things get physical. Direct action. Ricketts doesn't just call it protest, he calls it the theater of protest.
I love this concept because direct action like blocking a road or occupying an office isn't just about stopping a truck for a day. It's about decentering the opponent.
Decentering. What does that look like in practice?
There's this fantastic story Ricketts tells the police commissioner anecdote. It's almost like a scene from a heist movie. Activists occupied a government forestry office. They walked in, took over the space, but they didn't just sit on the floor and chant.
What did they do?
They went to the fax machine. And they used the police commissioner's own fax machine, with his official header on the paper, to send out a press release and a directive to regional offices saying the controversial logging operation was halted.
No way. They impersonated the power structure from inside the building.
He usurped it for a moment. And think about what that does to the perception of power. For that one moment, the police commissioner wasn't in charge. The citizens were. It shatters the dominant paradigm that authority is this unassailable, concrete thing.
It reveals that control is actually very fragile.
So fragile, it relies on everyone agreeing to follow the rules. When you stop following them, even for a moment, the whole illusion flickers.
And that empowers the participants. It transforms them from passive subjects who are acted upon into active agents who can act. It's theater, yes, but it's theater that breaks the spell of obedience.
That's the power of it.
So let's talk about mapping this all out. We've got citizens, we've got advocacy groups, governments, corporations, courts, the media. It's a crowded board.
It is. And Ricketts points out that these actors are fluid. Remember the sea change story? The wealthy property owners started as NMBYs. They were vested interest actors. But through this struggle, they transformed into public interest actors.
So the players can change teams.
They can. And that's why mapping the incentives is so important. What drives each of these players?
Well, corporations are driven by profit, obviously. And as you said, their social license to operate, they need to look good.
Right. Reputation is a huge one. Governments, they're driven by electoral stability and, resource management. They want to keep things quiet and keep the money flowing.
And the courts?
The courts are driven by precedent and, as we've established, a deep-seated protection of property rights. That's their programming.
So if you understand these incentives, you can start to predict behavior. This is where the power holder map comes in, right? It's not a direct line.
It's almost never a direct line. He says that's the rookie mistake. Protesting outside the decision-maker's office. The power holder map is a flowchart. It forces you to ask, okay, who actually influences the final decision-maker? It's rarely just public opinion.
So it might be that you have to pressure a bank.
To pressure a developer.
To pressure a local council member.
Exactly. It's systemic acupuncture. You don't just punch the wall. You find the specific nerve ending that makes the whole arm go numb.
One of the biggest parts of this map, though, is the narrative layer, the story the system tells about itself. And the big one is the narrative of neutrality.
The neutrality trap.
Yes.
The system claims all its institutions are neutral arbiters. The courts are impartial. The police just enforce the law. The government balances all interests.
And the book just debunks this completely.
It shows the feedback loop. Let's trace it. It starts with exclusion from legal standing, right?
Okay, the courtroom door is locked.
That forces citizens into direct action. The blockade, the occupation.
Which is then criminalized. The police show up.
Which then creates what Ricketts calls dissonance in the activist's mind. They see the system isn't neutral at all. It's actively taking a side.
And that dissonance either breaks the activist and they go home.
Or it creates a lifelong activist. It forges them because they've seen behind the curtain.
There's another feedback loop with corporate campaigning, too. When ethical shareholders start making noise.
Yes. The activists on the outside create a public fuss. The shareholders on the inside use that fuss to pressure the board, framing it as reputation damage. That damage becomes a market condition, a risk on the balance sheet that the board legally cannot ignore. The outside pressure creates the inside leverage.
Let's bring this into the present day. Ricketts wrote this before the explosion of social media, but his analysis of digital activism versus collectivism feels painfully relevant.
It really does. He makes a sharp distinction between digital tools and digital strategy. The great danger, he points out, is what he calls placebo activism.
Placebo activism. That stings. It's a great term.
It should. It's the feeling you get when you sign an online petition or change your profile picture to a flag. It feels like action. It gives you a little dopamine hit of moral righteousness. You think, I did my part.
But structurally, nothing happened.
Structurally, nothing moved. A power holder doesn't care about your Facebook likes. They care about sanctions, things that threaten their stability, their profit, their power. If the online noise doesn't translate into an actual offline cost for them, it's just noise.
And there is a darker side to digital activism too, isn't there, regarding security and surveillance?
The much darker side. Ricketts points out that analog activism was pretty safe. If you organized a meeting in a basement in 1980 and the police raided it, they caught the 10 people in the room.
Okay.
But today, if you organize on a digital platform, you are creating a perfect self-updating map of your entire network for the authorities. Getting access to one activist's inbox or their social media graph puts all their interlocutors in the frame.
It's a surveillance goldmine.
Total goldmine. And it makes movements incredibly brittle and easy to disrupt. Ricketts warns against confusing reach. How many people saw your tweet with power? How much actual leverage you can apply? They are not the same thing.
Another modern implication is the rise of legal intimidation. Ricketts talks about SLAPP suits.
SLAP suits.
Right.
Strategic lawsuits against public participation. This connects right back to the corporate sector. We see this with famous cases like the McLibel case in the UK.
Right.
Corporations use the legal system not necessarily to win on the truth of the matter, but to simply exhaust the resources of the activist. It's a war of attrition.
They have a billion-dollar legal department. You have a day job and maybe a pro bono lawyer. They just drown you in paperwork until you give up or go bankrupt.
Exactly. But Ricketts points out there's a countermove here. Activists can also use the court strategically, not necessarily to win the final ruling, but for the process of discovery.
Discovery, that's where you get to see their internal documents, right?
Yes. If a corporation sues you for defamation, for instance, you can demand access to their internal documents to build your defense. And often, what you find in those documents, internal memos, safety reports, emails, admitting they knew about the pollution, is far more damaging to the corporation's reputation than losing the lawsuit would ever be.
So you let them sue you just so you can get the keys to their filing cabinet.
It's high risk, high reward.
Yeah.
But it's a way to turn the tables. You use the legal process to gain information that you can then leak to the media. Again, it's using the system's weight against itself. It's like activist judo.
There is one more present-day issue I really want to touch on because it feels so pervasive. The gap in responsiveness. We see this all the time. The Iraq War protests are the classic example.
Yes.
Millions of people all over the world marched. It was one of the biggest global demonstrations in history. And the war happened anyway. Zero result.
That was a pivotal moment for so many people's disillusionment with democracy. The feeling of, we yelled as loud as we could and they just didn't listen. But Ricketts, using Moyer's model, explains why. Power holders do not yield to opinion, they yield to sanctions.
Okay, what's the difference?
Opinion is just what you think, it's the noise level. A sanction is the actual withdrawal of consent or cooperation that threatens their stability.
I see.
If millions of people march on a Saturday but then go to work on Monday and pay their taxes and vote for the same two parties, the power holders know they are safe. The system is resilient enough to absorb and ignore mass opinion if there is no cost attached to ignoring it.
That is a hard pill to swallow. It means our voice is much less valuable than our cooperation.
It's all about cooperation.
Yeah.
The crisis in perception here is thinking that because you are loud, you are powerful. You are only powerful if you can stop the machine from running, even for a little while.
This all links back so perfectly to the core themes of this channel, the idea that systems constrain our agency while appearing neutral.
It's the ultimate example. The liberal legal system appears fair and balanced, right? Justice is blind. But it requires a special interest, usually a financial loss, to even get into the room. This renders the public interest completely invisible to the court.
So the perception of the court as a place of justice acts as a blinder to its actual function, which is often as a protector of property.
The neutrality trap again. It's everywhere.
And the complexity is part of it. The procedural complexity shapes the perception of legitimacy. If it's hard to navigate, it must be serious and fair.
Yes, and it also creates what he calls analysis paralysis. Activist groups get so bogged down in trying to understand the endless bureaucracy or in their own internal structures that they never get anything done. The complexity isn't a bug. It's the feature designed to filter out all but the most well-resourced opponents.
This brings me to a metaphor from the book that I just can't get out of my head. The standing sheep.
Ah, yes. It's a powerful image.
Can you lay it out for us?
He says to imagine a paddock full of sheep. They were all grazing, heads down, doing what sheep do. It looks perfectly normal. Nice pastoral scene.
Right.
Then, one sheep stands up on his hind legs to look around.
And suddenly the whole dynamic of the scene changes.
Instantly, that one standing sheep reveals the passivity of all the others. Until one stands up, the herd just looks like a natural phenomenon. But when one stands, you suddenly realize the others are choosing to keep their heads down, or have been trained to.
The standing sheep reveals the fence. It makes the whole system visible.
Yes. And yes, she is visible. Yes, she is vulnerable. The farmer sees her. The dogs see her. But she is also the only one who can see the gate, the truck, and where they're all being taken.
The crisis in perception is the realization that normal life is actually passive compliance with a system that may be destructive.
And once you see that, you can't unsee it. You have to decide whether to get back down on all fours or stay standing.
As we wrap up, let's reflect on what this all means. The book really shifts your view of democracy, doesn't it? It stops being an outcome, a law passed, a person elected, and it becomes this constant process.
A constant struggle of interests. And participation in that struggle is a learned system. It's a skill. You don't just have rights. You have to know the specific levers, the media, the courts, the shareholders, to actually exercise them.
Which brings us to the sustainability part. Because everything we've described, the legal bias, the corporate power, the police intimidation, it sounds utterly exhausting. Ricketts ends on a surprisingly almost spiritual note for a book about law and systems.
He has to. Because as we discussed, the system is designed to burn you out, that perception of failure stage. That is designed to send you home defeated. So the final chapter is about how to stay in the fight.
And how do you stay?
Ricketts argues that to survive, you must detach your self-worth from the campaign outcome.
That sounds almost counterintuitive. Don't you have to care deeply about the outcome to fight for it?
You have to care about the action. You have to believe that what you are doing is the right thing to do. But if your entire sense of self, your happiness, is tied to whether you stop the dam or save the forest, you will be crushed because you will lose a lot. You are fighting a system that is designed to beat you.
So it's about becoming that lifelong activist.
It's about the transition from a subject, someone who obeys the rules, to a citizen, someone who participates in making them.
Listen.
The system is designed to keep you a subject. The Activists Handbook is the blueprint for becoming a citizen.
Right.
And he says you can stop resisting reality, which means stop suffering over how bad things are, and just get to work on the practical steps to change it.
It's the difference between wringing your hands and rolling up your sleeves. A profound shift.
It's the only way to stay sane and stay in the game.
The book is The Activists Handbook by Aidan Ricketts.
A masterclass in the mechanics of dissent.
This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind crisis and perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon. For a shorter visual overview of this topic, see the mini explainer link in the description. If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.